So, we're in Melbourne. Any of you from Melbourne here? I think this is how your tourist office want the world to see Melbourne. I found this word cloud on the web. European, apparently, you want to be seen as. Cafes, food, culture. Well, guys of a certain age mainly think about Melbourne for this word, sport. I think you're a bit of a sports-mad city. You know, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, Melbourne Cup, the Australian Open. That's how we tend to think about Melbourne anyway, certainly from the UK, from England. And sometimes you hold big international sporting events here. The last time I was in Melbourne, this was on. Of course, you're Melbourne, so you only got the quarterfinals. And us English had the indignity of sitting there watching the Welsh run rings round us for the whole first half. And there's poor Johnny being beaten by some Welsh guy. I hope the guys in red do as well next weekend. But luckily, the Welsh did what they normally do, which is that they faded in the second half, and the English won, and we all know where that story ends. What I didn't know, actually, until I was preparing for this talk, was that Melbourne had an Olympic Games. 1956, so just a bit before I was born. Not as long before I was born as I wish, but there you go. And it was known as the Friendly Games. And I just heard at lunchtime that it was the first time that all the athletes came out together for the closing ceremony. And it was when, you know, there was a lot of unrest, particularly in Eastern Europe. And it was seen as a way of bringing the world together. I imagine that it annoys most of you in Melbourne that Sydney then had the Olympic Games in 2000. And the Sydney Games was known as the best Olympic Games ever. But unfortunately, they lost that title, because last year we had the Olympic Games in London. And nearly everybody agrees that the London Games are now the best games that there ever has been. It didn't start well for Brits. I mean, we were all very nervous about how we were going to look as a nation in the world's eyes. And they started doing things like releasing the fonts for the Olympic Games. I mean, I think that's one of the most ugly fonts that anyone's ever created. Our mascots looked like, I don't know, 10-pin bowling things. They were horrible. And then, you know, a week or two before the games were starting, they started to say what was going to be in the opening ceremony. And the press announcement was we were going to get sheep. England's green and pleasant land. And, you know, we thought, oh, my God. And, you know, we'd had Beijing, you know, with this extraordinary national pride of China being displayed in the opening ceremony. And we were going to get sheep. Well, luckily, we got quite a bit more than sheep. We got Mr. Bean, Rowan Atkinson, fantastic take on Chariots of Fire. We got the Queen jumping out of a helicopter after meeting with James Bond. And quite my favorite piece of the opening ceremony was the Industrial Revolution. I don't know how many of you saw it, but there was this extraordinary reenactment of the Industrial Revolution in the center of the stadium. Lots of people working together, and they were forging what turned out to be one of the Olympic rings, which then rose up into the dark London sky above. And it reminded us Brits that although we have a lot of cultural guilt about our faded empire and everything, that something quite extraordinary happened in Britain when the Industrial Revolution happened. And at the heart of it were machines like this. This is obviously in the Olympic ceremony, but an image of James Watts's steam engine. And these were the machines that drove the Industrial Revolution and changed the whole way that the world worked. This is a technical drawing of James Watt's steam engine. And he was a maker, this man. He was academically engaged. He published some papers. But he wanted to build things. And when he was starting to build a steam engine, he was actually asked to repair what was called the Newcomb steam engine, which was already in operation. But he could only use it around coal mines because it used so much coal that you couldn't like put it up a valley where they wanted to have a flour mill or something like that. It would take too much coal to be transported up there. And he thought it must be able to be more efficient than that. And he was operating without great science. They didn't even know that water was what he called it after time, 2 parts air. They didn't know that. They didn't know about latent heat, about how it takes more energy to move water from a liquid to a gaseous state. Didn't understand those things. And yet, he built a steam engine which turned out to be 3 times more efficient than the Newcomb's steam engine. And I think in lots of ways, when we think about the workplace today, I don't think we know how efficient and effective a workplace could be. I have a feeling that it is exceptionally inefficient and ineffective, and we're stumbling in the dark sometimes about how to do that. And what I want to talk about is there's one little bit in the middle of this steam engine here, and it's called the governor. And the governor is this very simple device that as more steam goes into the steam engine, those balls move out, which closes the valve, and they come in again. If they come in too far, the valve opens and they move out again. It is the first example of a self-regulating feedback system that controls a machine. They were also used on looms and other things like that. And people would come from far and wide to see this bit of magic going on in a machine that controlled itself. James Watt was a fantastic marketer. He called it a governor because it replaced the governor, the boss on the floor, who was previously turning the valves and everything. He also came up with the word horsepower, so that mine owners knew how many horses they could lay off effectively when they bought in one of his steam engines. He was very, very smart. Now, why am I talking in a conference about happiness, about steam engines? And the reason is that that's the way that our emotions work in our body. They are self-regulation mechanisms. They help us respond to the environment. This is a very famous picture from 1950s psychology research, Paul Ekman, and he took these photographs of actors displaying emotions, and he took them all around the world, and every language had a word for these. So, we can see, surprise and anger and fear and disgust and sadness, and then with an exceptionally nice gap in the middle of his teeth, happiness. These emotions have evolved in humans because they are functional. Evolution actually doesn't give a damn about our happiness. Evolution is interested in our survival and our thriving, both individually and as a species. And these have proved useful things for evolution to invest energy in, if evolution does invest energy. I know it doesn't work quite like that. So fear and anger are well known to be part of the fight and flight mechanism. If there's a rustle in the grass, it paid us to think that might be a tiger. We needed to detect and take evasive action, which might be run away, or it could be freeze, so we hide. Sometimes these can feel unresponsive in certain modern-day situations. If you're in a disaster situation, sometimes it doesn't help to freeze. You should be running away. And if something slithers on the ground, we immediately think it's a snake. You should all actually be much more afraid of electric plug sockets. They're much more likely to kill you. Well, maybe not in Australia, actually. But these mechanisms have evolved in human beings because they help us survive. But what about happiness and the whole broad swathe of positive emotions? Well, I'm sure many of you heard of Barbara Fredrickson's work and the broaden and build theory of positive emotions, that when we're in a good mood, we can see the whole picture, the whole horizon. We've got a larger repertoire of responses to what's going on. Highly, highly functional for us. And also, it builds our resilience over time. Exposure to good events, tasks that we find interesting, engage us, over time builds our capacity, our intellectual, our emotional strengths. So they really offer us a sort of feedback and insight-generating mechanism, which helps us respond to key information in our environment, and they trigger positively adaptive actions. And in fact, probably the take-home message about the difference between the so-called negative emotions, and I think they're called negative in my book anyway, because they're responding to negative threats in the environment. They're not necessarily comfortable to feel, though sometimes I do enjoy being angry, actually. But they are responding to threats. And the positive emotions are really much more about opportunities and achievements. And if we think about that in a work context, yes, sometimes work is about avoiding threats, but often it's about creating and seizing opportunities too. Now, these emotions, what's interesting about them is that we can look at those and we can name them, which means that we are displaying them. We are communicating with our body language and our faces what we are feeling and the emotions that we are experiencing. I've actually got just a tiny bit of pain in my shoulder now, but you don't know that. But if I'm smiling, you can assume that I'm happy. So we communicate these very, very easily. And what that means is actually emotions are contagious, that we coordinate them, that we actually pick up the moods of people around them and we coordinate them. We coordinate our voices. If I stayed around in Australia too long, I'd get your twang, no doubt. We share them. We're much more likely to laugh in the company of other people. In fact, it looks slightly mad when you laugh on your own. And it's always a bit disconcerting when you're walking down the street and someone is laughing, and actually they got that little thing in their ear, and they're actually laughing with a friend, virtually through the phone. But it looks very, very strange. And we communicate with them. These women are gossiping. They're sharing their surprise at, Mrs. Jones down the road or something. And if you think about that in the workplace, that's going on all the time. All these emotions are being quite contagious. And this really is the thesis of a whole great bit of work which I can recommend to you called Connected, and about how our social networks and about how we're embedded in them affect our behavior. They end up drawing graphs like this. Is from the Framlington Health Study in the States. And they can show actually about how happiness moves around a social network. So not only does your happiness, or lack of it, affect the people that you know, but it affects your friends' friends and your friends' friends' friends. There is a second and a third order effect of my emotional experience. Think about that in an organization, how it moves around. And Barbara Fredrickson, so this is a picture of Barbara, she's done some work about emotions at work. In one company, they had 60 business teams. They already knew how these business teams were performing in the organization's own key performance indicators, their KPIs. So they knew which teams were high performing, which were medium, which were low. And what Barbara and her colleagues did was they studied team meetings. And they looked at the way that people communicated in those team meetings. They looked at how positive they were, whether they were encouraging and supportive, or how negative they were, sarcastic, cynical, whatever. And they grouped the teams like this. There were 15 high performing, 26 medium, 19 low, and they marked the ratio of positive to negative expressions in those teams. And there was a huge gradient. The high-performing teams had 5 or 6 positive exchanges for every negative. The low-performing teams had 3 negatives to every positive. These were very different feels of team meetings. I think we've all been in a range of teams. We've all been in different meetings like this. We've had those experiences. And her collaborator, Marcela Losado, is very into nonlinear systems and how you map them. These are commonly called butterfly effect diagrams. And what he was doing really was mapping where the team meeting might go. And the high-performing teams can operate in this expanded, what I call a possibility space. So running up the graph is emotional energy from high to low, and running across is on the left is inquiry, which sort of means new ideas. And they use the word advocacy here to mean carrying on as you are. I don't quite use the word advocacy like that, but it's how they're using the word in this paper. And so what you can see here is that the low-performing teams, collapse is the chaos theory term, which I rather like, and because it feels a bit like they collapse into a non-inquiring low-energy space. The committee chair drives the agenda through that they wanted to do. The meeting feels boring, dull, a waste of time. We've all been in them. Hopefully, we've been in those team meetings that are buzzy, lively, new ideas come out. And the high-performing teams, they can be in the non-inquiring space. Sometimes that's what they need to do. But they can access the whole space. Fredrickson and Lasada come up with this magic ratio that to be a high-performing team, you need to operate in a space of 3-to-1 positives and negatives, right up to 8-to-1 positive negatives. They actually model, if you go over 8-to-1, you collapse into a sort of Pollyanna space where you all agree with each other, and not much work gets done. And that's not really very useful. So they show that happiness at work is related to performance, but they don't show it's causal because this is studying teams at one point in time. And luckily, we can start to answer this question. Does happiness come from high performance, or does happiness lead to high performance? Gallup have done a huge study about this, which is happiness at time 1 and performance at time 1. Happiness at time 2 and performance at time 2. Ed Diener talked about this morning. And they basically tested statistically whether it was this one, happiness leading to performance, or this one, performance leading to happiness. And the conclusion of the study was that both models fitted the data. You could explain it both ways. But that model 1 was a much better fit. So much so that the researchers, and these are Gallup guys, these are not the most radical guys in the world, suggesting that these data suggest that the impact of happiness at work on performance is twice as large as from performance to happiness at work. That's quite startling. If we want to think about happiness at work, we only really need these to be equal. If anybody could just make a high-performing team, they would go and do it. But here is a new potential business model that happiness can drive performance. So, happiness at work, I would suggest, builds more adaptive teams. It leads to higher performance. But somehow it still isn't taken seriously. It sounds a bit mad. And in fact, I've got evidence that it sounds mad. So here's a quote from Business Week, which is an analyst, and this is what he says, and I'm sure it is a he, this guy. The management have focused on the employees to the detriment of the shareholders. Why would I buy a stock like that? That is a dominant attitude, not only in the investment community, but in the business community altogether. He was actually talking about this company, which is Costco. I think you had them here. I'm not saying that large supermarkets are the best thing in the world, but one of the things you can say about Costco is that they are normally in the Great Place to Work list in the US. And their CEO says that I happen to believe that in order to reward the shareholder in the long term, you have to please your customers and employees. Notice that word long term entering here. I think that's quite an interesting dynamic that goes on around all sorts of things. If we think too short term, we get into problems. Costco are not the only company doing this. This is a very famous company if you're American. I'm sure there's some in the room, and you may have been to the States. You may have heard of this company. If you're an American woman, you probably would have bought shoes from this company. This is the Amazon of shoes in the States. They really are, all they are as a company is a huge warehouse, a lot of people answering the phones and emails and things like that, and they're shipping shoes. And their business model is happiness. This is Tony Hsieh, their chief executive officer, second employee of Zappos. He joined Zappos in 1998, I think. He sold Zappos to Amazon for $1 billion just a few years ago. It's now worth $2 billion. And so people who answer the phones in Zappos are only given 2 rules. Number 1, be yourself. Number 2, use your judgment. No scripts. No key performance indicators on how many calls you can deal with in an hour. The longest call on record, 8 hours. He thinks it's his opportunity to market. You're talking to a customer. Talk to them as a person. Australia, you have a great software company called Atlassian. Their business model is very much about allowing people to be themselves at work, so much so that their website has this guy's picture on it. You know, a bank would not do that, I don't think. But why not? Why not wear his hair however he wants to? If he's a great programmer and a great guy, let's just get on with it. And also, Ed talked about this morning, that there's proof that the Great Place to Work list is a great predictor of stock market performance. where companies that are in it are outperforming the stock market between 2.3 and 3.8% every year. That's a big deal. So that analyst is a fool who said you shouldn't invest in these companies. He's actually not doing his job. So happiness works. We get more innovation. We get higher performance, shareholder value. I could tell you about low absenteeism and all sorts of other things. But happiness at work is not mainstream yet. How do we take an idea like this, which I'm sure a lot of you are enthusiastic about? You're enthusiastic about happiness in your communities, in your schools, in your families. How do you take this mainstream? And it's not mainstream yet. Well, normally when you think about an early market, a new market, people start talking about how long will it be till people pick up an idea. They typically carve it up into groups like this, that at the beginning there are innovators. Tony Hsieh's an innovator, Atlassian are innovators. And then there are enthusiasts who get the idea and they really want to put it into action. But if you want to get into the mainstream market, you need to start appealing to pragmatists. And then if you want to go really mature, to conservatives. You hardly ever get to the skeptics at the end. You can learn from skeptics. They often have good ideas, actually, good pushbacks to you. But you're unlikely to sell to them. So you have to mind this gap, because basically there's a gap between the enthusiasts, what motivates an enthusiast and what motivates a pragmatist. And I think it's a lot of the reasons why ideas don't go mainstream in any situation. You have to mind this gap. So pragmatists will say things like, I'm dealing with the present. They value experience. They're interested in details. Whereas enthusiasts tend to be thinking about creating the future, liking new ideas and inspired by vision. And they're sort of different things, but you need to find ways to close that gap. And that's what I'm interested in. I'm effectively a statistician, an applied statistician. How do we close this gap between what I feel in my bones is a great idea and actually taking it mainstream? And in a business context, and what I'm doing now, and what I'm going to have a go at doing, because who knows whether we'll succeed, is I'm going to have a go at this. The dreaded staff survey that lands on people's desks or in their inboxes and what they're going to do with it. And the thing with surveys at the moment is that we know in the UK that 50% of people have done a staff survey in the last 3 years. But 80% of them think it made absolutely no difference to their working life at all. So organizations are investing in these surveys, but they're no use at all. Why is that happening? I can give you a long list of reasons why. Wrong questions, bad user experiences, and coming back to feedback. No feedback to individuals. I mean, when you do a Cosmopolitan magazine quiz, it tells you mostly A's, mostly B's, mostly C's. You know, it's fun. Why not make staff surveys like that that give you feedback about your work? We are all an individual agent of our own happiness at work and our happiness in our lives. So help us learn how to be that. Teams are so ignored in this process. Teams are where work happens. They're the people you go to work with every day. There's great change. There's great things you can do. We can always do more things together. So teams is often a thing. And then, of course, yes, the HR department. Yes, the CEO thing. There's things they can do. At the moment, most staff surveys follow a sort of academic model. We will come in, we will study your business. We will go away for 6 or 8 weeks and write a report. And then we will report to senior management. And then senior management will have 1 hour on the agenda about what they should do about the staff engagement surveys. And a quarter of the year has gone by, and nothing has happened. There's no momentum to that. Watts' governor did not work by the balls going out, okay, better change the amount of coal we put in tomorrow, guys. It was in a real-time situation. If you want to create things, you've got to bring them close to people's experience. And that's what we're doing. We're building websites about how happy is your work, asking people more fun, engaging questionnaires. I guess we'll prove whether we do that or not. We give people instant feedback on their scores in ways that are easy to understand. Too often, statisticians worry about the second and third decimal place. And that is my job as a statistician. But a manager really wants to know 2 bits of information. How do I do compared to other people? And how can I get better? So create your numbers to do that. We just create simple numbers from 0 to 10, 0 to 100. It's very easy to see where they're going. We create traffic lights for people. And really, this is the opportunity, which is that we can create happiness at work surveys and tools. We're going to move beyond. I actually convinced the word survey is totally the wrong word, but as yet I haven't come up with a new one. Answers on a postcard, please. And one of the things about this idea is it's easier done than said. So we're using what is the classic thing on the internet these days, which is we're using what they call a freemium model, which is that you have to give away your tools. You can't expect people to buy things straight away on the web. They don't do it. So play with that energy of getting people to come and experience what you're doing, and then make models where you buy it. So we only sell to organizations. All our tools are free for individuals, free for small teams of up to 5 people, so that people can try it and see it. And then if organizations see value in it, we hope they'll buy it. We're not trying to become a consultancy. We're trying to just offer a small tool around something that most people don't like doing, which is about measurement. So you can just try it out, sorry. Now, the point really is that we create numbers, but numbers is not the end. Numbers is not the goal. The goal is insight. The goal is bringing into awareness what the issues are. And numbers can be a useful tool for that. But you don't need numbers for insight. They're just a way of doing it. And what will create change is if insights are generated, either with individuals, with teams, with organizations, and they are acted upon. And then change happens. Change happens in the conversations in organizations. You can create measurement tools and we can see organizations flatline or go down. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in how do we make great workplaces? How do we make great communities? How do we make great societies? That's what all my work really is. It's always leaning into how do we create positive change. So I think we need to make engines of change. And I think that the next revolution will be powered by happiness, by people's experience. And I genuinely think that. There's so much energy in enthusiasm. There is so much energy in happiness. So we're creating these things, and I quite like the fact that one of our views looks a bit like a governor. And so if we're all going to work together to create a new revolution, which I think should be about creating better societies in every way, I think they should be fairer, they should be more sustainable, and they should be more fun places, then we all need to work together. And we're just trying to create tools that help that become a happier revolution. Thank you very much.